The Milky Way galaxy has seen a fair few empires rise and fall in its time. Whether the Eldari in the M20s or humanity's Imperium later, many races have had the run of the galaxy and many others have controlled swathes of it too. However, perhaps there are no entities left alive in the galaxy today who have seen as many empires come and go as the one we shall address today. These almost godlike beings have been around for millions of years at least, having gone to war with the Old Ones themselves. Though their power these days is greatly diminished following a betrayal by those they once enslaved, the race that now holds their shattered strength is still wary of unleashing those they called gods, lest the shards run amok. They are the destroyers of the Necron tier turned slaves of the Necrons. They are the beings known to the Eldari as the Ingir, or to the others as the Catan. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. No one truly knows when the entities now known as the Catan first came into existence, but they are old. Very old. Some in fact speculate that they were created from etheric energy at the dawn of the universe itself, though I can find no science or history, unfortunately, to back this up. However, the original Catan seemingly were nothing like the murderous monsters you and I would recognise today, mainly because they didn't have any bodies at all to recognise them by. The Catan, or whatever they called themselves since that particular name was given much later, were, as mentioned, beings of etheric energy. They were huge, seemingly large enough to actually envelop stars, which they would do in order to drain the star of energy as their means of sustenance. Their appetite was said to be incredible, perhaps insatiable, and so when they ran out of somewhat nearby stars, they would need to travel to new systems to try and find more. To do so, it seems they developed what are described as diaphanous, aka ultralight, and translucent wings in order to travel. It should be stressed this was not the warp nor the webway, as the former is totally incomprehensible to the Catan even today, and the latter would likely not be built until much later by the beings known as the Old Ones. The Catan would go through this cycle of consumption and travel for millions of years following their creation, perhaps in a less malevolent manner to the Tyranids, if you like, but this would not last forever. Approximately 60 million years ago, the being known as Azar-Gorod, more on them later, came to feed on a star believed to be in the outer regions of the halo stars in Segmentum Obscurus. Unfortunately for the galaxy at large, probably at least assuming the Catan weren't going to devour everything, this star was in the system inhabited by the race known as the Necron tier, led by the Triarch under the Silent King Cesarek. Having been defeated repeatedly and reduced to an annoyance by the Old Ones and their allies like the Eldari, the bitter and hateful Necron tier have been studying the stars as a means of finding a way to enact their vengeance. They found the being they named the Catan, meaning star gods in their tongue, feeding on their own star during these studies, and through some unknown means they were even able to establish communication with it. However, there was still a seemed barrier of comprehension, as the etheric Catan could not understand the materium without a physical form of its own. As such, the Necron tier realised they needed to build said forms, which they did using living metal, a material they had long used to construct starships and the like. At this point, the Necron tier had already decided that the Catan would be their new weapon to defeat the Old Ones, and once they had brought Azar-Gorod across to its new body using a starlight bridge, whatever one of those is, other Catan were either found or summoned to be transferred as well. However, the Catan would not be harnessed as the Necron tier had hoped, or the race itself changed its mind on what the Catan would be to them, even if the Triarch wanted something else. Before long, if not immediately, the Necron tier began to worship the newly physical Catan as gods. There's no surprise really though, they literally called them star gods in their own language. And oh boy, the Catan did not end up being benevolent deities, as they ended up enslaving the entirety of the Necron tier race. The problem was, they found that they enjoyed being worshipped, and all the while, the war with the Old Ones ground on and reinvigorated, and the Catan intended to use the seeming alliance they had with the Silent King to win it. After all, they had found through the war that souls were far more delicious and enjoyable than the stellar energy they had previously fed on, and their hunger was as voracious as ever. One of the Catan came to Cesarek and persuaded, convinced, or bullied him into upgrading the Necron tier, and we all know how that story ended. In a perhaps poetic twist, the Necron tier's frail physical bodies were replaced with ones of living metal, just as the Catan had been, and as their gods consumed their souls en masse, the Necron tier died, and the Necrons were born. The Catan and their newly de-souled slaves, the Necrons, waged war once again on the Old Ones and co. in what became known as the War in Heaven. Not the one between the Eldari gods from mythology, the other one. Despite still having no comprehension of the warp and psychic powers, the living metal armies were more than a match for the Old Ones. Even the supposed creation of the Krorks, who later became the Orcs so the story goes, was unable to stop them. The Catan helped the Necrons to breach the webway. The warp entities, the enslavers, ran amok as the psychic demands of the Old Ones and their allies intensified, and before too long, the War in Heaven had completely flipped on its head, and the Catan and Necrons were victorious. The Old Ones would eventually go extinct as far as we knew, but the Catan would not get to revel in their victory for too long. I suspect that left unchecked they would have ruled or consumed the galaxy, but nope. There was a bit of revenge to be had first. You see, whilst the Catan had created the Necrons, they did not command them directly. That responsibility through the command protocols lay still with the last Silent King, who had lost his soul but retained his persona through the upgrades. Cesarek had bided his time through the War in Heaven, waiting for the ideal moment to enact vengeance on the gods who had duped him and made pawns of his entire race. And so, when the Old Ones were defeated, he commanded the Necrons to turn on their masters using the command protocols that he had over all of them. This turned out to be incredibly successful, up to a point at least, as the Catan were caught in an arrogant hubris and defeated in the uprising of the Necrons, but not quite entirely. The Catan could not be destroyed as you or I would understand. The only one who truly died ended up infecting the Necrons with the Flare virus on the way out, so you can understand the hesitancy to destroy any more. Instead, the Necrons did probably the next best thing and shattered the Catan into shards, imprisoning them, as far as I can tell, in what are known as Tesseract labyrinths. These devices use zero-point energy reactors to imprison beings of pure energy, and so they ensnared the Catan shards. No, I don't get how vibrational energy of molecules absolute zero does this, that science is a little beyond me, but it's the Necrons, I can sort of buy it. Following their successful revolt, the Necrons retreated to their tombs until their reawakening in M41, and thus the Catan for the most part slept with them, trapped in the labyrinths with only fragments of personality, but no memories from the beings they used to be. However, when the Necrons reawakened, they were loath to unleash the shards they possessed once again. The odds may have been astronomically low, but there existed a slim possibility that a shard might just break free, and that was not a risk that any, save the most desperate overlord or cryptech, would want to take. Though there are many Catan shards held by the Necrons, or at least I expect that there are, some of them have become infamous either before their shattering or after their reappearance in the galaxy. One of the Catan who falls into both categories is a name we already mentioned, Azar-Gorod, better known to you and I as the Nightbringer. This was the first Catan found by the Necron tier, the one devouring their own sun, and also the first brought into the living metal bodies constructed using the Starlight Bridge. Once it had done so, it was also the first to discover that mortal souls or life force was such a delicacy, and so it and the other Catan began consuming all that they could find. The Necron tier were not immune to this, and it is said that they had to pledge loyalty to the Nightbringer just to stop their entire species from being devoured. Admittedly, when it was eating what the Necron tier wanted it to, i.e. basically everything that wasn't them, the Nightbringer was nigh unstoppable. Whole regions of space were said to be left lifeless by Azar-Gorod, and every race save the Krorks was somehow implanted by this Catan with the fear of death itself. I suspect that this became the inspiration for the Grim Reaper in ancient human mythology, since the Reaper is their name for it, whilst the Eldari came to know it as Kalis Ra, the Destroyer of Light. It is said also that the Nightbringer even fought against Kala Mensha Kane, the war god of the Eldari, and though Kane won and shattered its living metal necrodermis, the explosion supposedly tainted the god with the aspect of the Reaper, and perhaps even helped lay the seeds of the Chaos Gods themselves, depending on which version of events you choose to believe. The other interaction between the Nightbringer and the Eldari pantheon is only a rumour, as there is conflicting information and ideas as to what exactly happened sometime in the period towards the end of or after the War in Heaven. Egged on potentially by the laughing god Shegarak, Azagorod went from consumer of mortals to consumer of gods, as it turned on and began to consume its fellow Catan and found them even more delicious. This pseudo-treachery didn't seem to affect the outcome of the War in Heaven, but by the end I suspect that the Nightbringer was the mightiest Catan of all in a physical, battlefield, fighty sort of sense. However, all this fear-inducing and fear-consuming and soul-devouring and cannibalism didn't make the Nightbringer smart enough to see what came next. In fact, I'm going to have to do something a little bit silly and criticise this thing's common sense and perception here. When the race that you have enslaved and devoured the souls of starts building titanic hypercannons capable of supposedly killing gods, how do you not immediately get suspicious or concerned about what they plan to do with them, especially since the War in Heaven was probably basically over by this time? But nope. The Nightbringer was so arrogant and filled with hubris that it assumed the weapons being designed and built were a tribute to it. Spoiler, they weren't. Of course they weren't. How disconnected from reality do you have to be to not see that they weren't? Then again, I suppose when you're basically incapable of interacting with the reality for potentially billions of years, I guess I could forgive it. No, sorry, Nightbringer, you're an idiot. Come at me. Anyway, the Necrons unleashed their weapons, and the Nightbringer was shattered like almost all the other Catan, but just as it was the first to meet the Necrons, some say it may have been the first Catan, or at least Catan Shard, to awaken or be released. Though we lack a date, we believe a shard was found and then somehow destroyed by Deathwatch operatives in the Dulga system, but it is not believed that the shard was actually awakened to fight, despite the Inquisition being involved to screw it all up. However, evidence emerged that the Nightbringer also had a shard hidden within the tomb world of Pavonis, which was investigated by a hidden Inquisitor and Captain Uriel Ventress of the Ultramarines. This evidence proved to be true, as a civil war was incited on Pavonis by a human named Casimir de Valtos, who was supposedly working with the Drakari to excavate or capture the shard, assumedly to harness its power for themselves. It is claimed de Valtos wanted immortality, so it would make sense. The initial inquisitorial plan, once this was revealed, was to unleash an exterminatus upon Pavonis, one of the few times I can actually say the Inquisition used its common sense. But Captain Ventress, he was having none of that. He asked for and received permission to enter the mining complex being excavated to find the shard in an attempt to stop de Valtos. Unfortunately, the Ultramarines were too late and the shard was awoken and unleashed. Somehow the Astartes were not wiped out by the Nightbringer, who disappeared before too long, and since then I'm sure there have been many incidents of either that shard or others wreaking havoc the galaxy over. I'd be curious with that exact shard, since it seems there were not many Necrons to control it, to see whether it went after the Necrons at some point in an attempt at vengeance. I doubt it would have gotten far unless Tesseract Labyrinth tech wasn't working, and without the memories of Azagorod I do find it unlikely, but it's a fun thought experiment. What happens when a Catan actually goes rogue? Because we don't have a lot of data on that. One of the other legendary Catan from both the back when times and today is the being known as Mephetran, or the Messenger to the Necron tier. However, this Catan has many, many names. The Eldari call it the Jackal God, Jukero call it Artemora, and humanity seems generally to refer to it as the Deceiver. Even before the Necron tier found it, it seems this Catan was an outcast of sorts, distrusted by its fellow beings, though the Necron tier hoped it could somehow be the bridge builder between the two races. This didn't happen, or if it did, then it certainly didn't happen in the way that I suspect the Necron tier envisaged or wanted. It is thought that Mephetran was the one to convince the Triarch to go to war, or perhaps back to war with the Old Ones, and it is all but confirmed that it was the messenger who convinced Cesarek to sanction the conversion from Necron tier to Necron during said war. And the Deceiver didn't stop there, not just content with messing with the race that had probably worshipped it like all other Catan. This is where sources conflict, but some say that rather than Chegarak, it was the Deceiver who convinced the Nightbringer and seemingly other Catan to turn and feed upon one another, promising them a greater feast than even the war in heaven could provide. There is actually an Eldari artifact that speaks of the Jackal god turning brother against brother, and though that is said to refer to the time following the Catan's return, the reputation likely had to come from somewhere, so why not its own quote-unquote brothers? Now, one might also assume that being one of the weaker Catan physically, if the tales are true, the Deceiver would have ended up on somebody's menu eventually. But it hightailed it as far away from Azagorod and some of the other more violent Catan in order to save its own necrodermis. The stories say that by the end, only 4 Catan were left alive, including the Nightbringer and the Deceiver, and whilst this has proven to be almost certainly false, it shows that the Catan's hunger was potentially voracious enough to almost drive their own species to extinction. However many Catan were truly consumed due to the Deceiver and or Chegarak's whisperings is unknown, but every one that died only made the job of the Necrons quicker and easier when the time came. Even the control and manipulations of Mephetran could not save it from what followed, and though some suggest it was the last one to leave the wider galaxy, it too was shattered by the Necrons and mostly sealed away. However, whilst the Nightbringer's first return to the galaxy was loud and violent just like that Catan, it appears as though the Deceiver ended up returning first through some unknown means. Whilst its shards have probably popped up all over, none of whom truly have the power of the being they once were, they still all had the delusion and controlling tendencies of the full Deceiver. It is thought that those still under the ownership of the Necrons actually believe themselves to be manipulating said Necrons, and who knows, maybe some of them actually are, but it's some of the seemingly non-contained shards that have caused all manner of damage. For example, one shard ended up possessing or impersonating a planetary governor by the name of Tarkis on an unknown planet. We're not sure quite what it got up to, but it must have been pretty atrocious, as it drew the attention of none other than the Officio Assassinorum. A Kalidas assassin was sent to dispose of Takis, but a Catan phase knife was the chosen weapon of the assassin, and thus it did nothing. You see, phase weapons like this are made from the same stuff as a Catan's necrodermis to our knowledge, i.e. probably living metal, and when used against a Catan, they either pass straight through it, or get absorbed by it. Both seem to happen in this case, and the assassin either fled or died, probably depending on the whim of the shard. On a wider scale, the Deceiver seems to be working with some memory or understanding of what it is and how it can be beaten, as it, or a shard of it, is believed to be hunting down and destroying the Blackstone fortresses. To understand why the Deceiver seems to be doing this, you probably need to understand somewhat what the relation is between the Catan and the warp, or should I say, the lack of one. The Catan cannot comprehend the warp at all. Psykers are something of a blind spot for them, and I suspect that demons with the right strength could be a real nightmare. To combat this, the Catan and the Necrons develop what are known as pylons, Blackstone devices that nullify or weaken the warp and its denizens in a surrounding region. Cadia, for example, was a world covered in pylons before it was destroyed, which is why the Eye of Terror was kept in check for so long, and possibly why the Cicatrix Maledictum popped up after it fell. However, Blackstone can be polarized in reverse to amplify the warp as opposed to dampening it, as seems to be the case with the Blackstone Fortress that could break down the warp real space barrier and unleash pure warp power upon its foes. Their origins are unknown, but it is believed that they are one of the only things, if not the only thing, capable of destroying the Catan. Part of me is curious whether they were perhaps developed as the Catan killers by the Necrons after the War in Heaven, but without Psykers or warp comprehension, this is exceptionally unlikely. Actually, the Eldari do call them the Talismans of Vol, which implies that they or their deities built the fortress, but at the same time, demons seem to think it's not from this galaxy, so it probably isn't the Eldari, so we can't really say for sure. In any event, the Deceiver shards seem to have become aware of this and have tried to have them all destroyed. Some even say that the Gothic War, aka the 12th Black Crusade, was orchestrated and organised by the Catan to do just that. And with 4 out of 6 destroyed in that war and another lost later in the fall of Cadia, I suppose you could call it a success, though Huron Blackheart still has one, and there's a new one that's just been found in the Galactic Edge, so it's not quite job done yet. This whole warp nullifying business with the Deceiver doesn't actually stop with the pylons or the fortresses, as one of the more powerful shards made an audacious play in the aftermath of the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledicta. It pulled the same impersonation trick as the one who became Tarkus that we mentioned earlier, but with a far more ambitious target, Omegon, co-Primarch of the Alpha Legion, believed to have died on Escrador against Robu Gilliman, or Pluto against Rogel Dawn, take your pick. Using an Alpha Legion warband who somehow fell for the ruse, the Shard planned to install more pylons around the region of the Great Rift, presumably to try and keep it in check or restrict it as far as possible. It based itself on a Necron tier world that had probably been used for the original Necron conversion process, as it contained soul forges that the Shard wished the Alpha Legion to guide humans to in order to upgrade them or give them some new soul food, which had actually also been foreseen by the Eldari, by the way, go figure. However, the ruse could not be maintained forever. For one reason or another, a member of the Alpha Legion realised that his Primarch was not his Primarch, but instead it was a Catan, and gathered allies from the 20th Legion as well as the Word Bearers. The battle went poorly for the Forces of Chaos due to the raw power of this Shard, but being on a Necron tier world likely cost this in the end, as it was imprisoned by a Tesseract Labyrinth by the Astartes. Presumably this was its second imprisoning, unless some shards were never captured or got away or something like that. There's no evidence either way, but interesting. Though the other Catan shards are not quite as renowned as the Nightbringer and Deceiver, there are several others I wish to address before we move on. First is Magladroth, better known as the Void Dragon in Eldari myth. This one is another of the violent Catan, maybe not quite on the Nightbringer's level, but certainly one the Deceiver wanted to avoid, and it seems as though it's very closely tied to the Blackstone fortresses and pylons. According to the aforementioned Eldari myths, the incredible power of the Void Dragon was such that it took the works of Vol to stop it, and this is the tale that outright states that Vol was the one who built the Blackstone fortresses as a counter to the Catan. It seems as though this attempted attack by Vol failed, if the myths are true that it happened at all, but the Void Dragon is also associated with the other Blackstone creations, the pylons. Sometime after or near the end of the War in Heaven, the Void Dragon was the one responsible for developing the pylons to help suppress the warp, which makes me think that the Blackstone fortresses and their warp weaponry was somewhat scary or unnerving to it, which backs up the idea that they are actually able to kill the Catan. Unfortunately for the Void Dragon, it didn't get time to finish the project, mainly due to what I politely termed the Great Necron backstab, interrupting things and shattering it before it had time to finish the job. One shard did come to rest and/or was sealed away on what became the Eldari maiden world Silentia, later to be recovered in around 941, only to escape and run amok a dozen years later before being captured. But there is potentially another that we know about. Now, this one is not quite confirmed, but there is rumour that a shard of the Void Dragon came to rest on none other than Terra itself, where it was able to actually escape eventually whatever bonds held it. However, this shard didn't get to leave Terra under its own steam or do any more damage to the place, as it fell afoul in around N2 of one of the most powerful beings in the post-Old One's age, the Emperor of Mankind. The ancient Terran myth of St. George and the Dragon is supposedly a retelling of the battle between the two, which was won by the Emperor, who imprisoned and then somehow transported the dragon to Mars to seal it in a place called the Noctis Labyrinthus. Now, we can confirm there is a creature imprisoned in that labyrinth as of M31, known as the Dragon of Mars. There are supposed connections and tales that seem to suggest that it is the Void Dragon itself, but there's nothing concrete to confirm it. Some in turn say that the Emperor even knew this fact and used it as a means of allowing the Mechanicum to rise in future, whilst others claim that the dragon controlled or controls the Mechanicum/Mechanicus in some sense, but again, we have no confirmation. Next is, and forgive my pronunciation here, Clandugor, known as the Flayer. We don't actually know much about what this Catan did, but it is special for one simple reason. It was the only one destroyed entirely during the Great Necron backstab. Whilst this is interesting in itself, it makes me think that the Flayer was one of, if not the first Catan attacked by the rebelling Necrons due to the aftermath of that incident. The Flayer somehow infected the Necrons with what is known today as the originally called Flayer virus. This caused a strange phenomenon in the infected, causing them to become bloodthirsty killers known as Flayed Ones, who will wear the flesh of their dead enemies and serve as unwitting terror troops in a Necron army. They're all certifiably insane, pretty much, and any infected with the virus are immediately exiled en masse or even killed if they dare show up on a battlefield. This curse hasn't just affected those who actually attacked the Flayer, as new Flayed Ones do still appear today. And whilst I don't know if it's strictly contagious like a disease you or I would understand, it's definitely a warning to say do not kill a Catan outright. They will ruin your race's existence for the rest of said existence. Finally, I wish to talk about what happens when the Catan are actually unleashed in as near to their full power by those who usually enslave and control them as far as possible. These are the Transcendent Catan, seemingly an amalgamation of several dozen shards brought into one whole that literally radiates elemental energy and is way more powerful than even being made of Catan shards would suggest it is. How exactly the Necrons come to build one, I don't know. Why they'd build one, I don't know, but they exist. In order to contain these things, a cryptech named Svarok developed what is known as the Tesseract Vault, a gargantuan floating war machine that allowed the Transcendent Catan to actually be harnessed on the battlefield in relative safety. Built of living metal like almost everything the Necrons have ever built ever, the Vault is actually in a constant cycle of decay and repair. The Catan is so powerful that it is literally destroying its prison on a constant basis, whilst the constructs known as the Canoptech leeches attached to the Vault try and keep that damage fixed up. At the centre of the Vault sits the Catan itself, trapped by a force shield generated by the Canoptech Sentinel over its quote-unquote head, using the Catan's own power to create said shield to prevent any overloads. This prevents a Vault breach and the releasing of the Catan, but there have still been times where the decision has been taken, or forced, to lower this shield and unleash the Transcendent Catan with no shackles and no minders. This is obviously a good thing, as a fully unleashed Catan can do incredible damage to any enemies, but the Necrons are playing with etheric fire by letting that thing off the leash. After all, the Catan, if they remember, likely don't take kindly to the enslavement enforced upon them by the Necrons. They may not remember how they got there, but their personalities, their desires to dominate are still there. We see that with the Deceiver. As a result, though we don't have any confirmed instances of it happening, a released Transcendent Catan probably has a high chance, we believe, of actually turning on the Necrons during or after the battle it is unleashed in. Like I say, data is lacking, but it's another example as to why the Necrons are often so paranoid about letting the Catan loose, even when they're more directly controlled. One false move, one mistake, and it could be a trip to the reconstruction or revivification chamber for the Overlord or Cryptech brave or stupid enough to unleash it. And that's best case scenario. And there you have it, a bit of insight into the beings known simply as the Catan. Whilst there is undoubtedly conflicting information surrounding their history, perhaps no surprise given how long ago much of it was, there is no way anyone can say that the Catan weren't some of the most powerful denizens real space has ever seen. If you need proof, just look at what their fragments have been capable of since their return, impersonating Primarchs, decimating star systems, and more. It makes you wonder just how powerful the Catan were in their War in Heaven heyday, and it makes me very glad I wasn't there to see it firsthand. In any event, it is now time to change tack once more and move on to another topic. I have a feeling that the next log might not be the longest, but it's an interesting thing that I want to talk about. What happens when the Inquisition basically has a Space Marine chapter in its metaphorical back pocket? And no, I'm not talking about the Grey Knights or the Death Watch, this is something else. For now, thank you all for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.